friend, I'm going to do this later because this is a kind of big question.
Okay.
My friend, Mr. John Churchville, he's doing the Michigan Music Education Association Music Practice Podcast.
Okay.
Doing that. And he has like 2 questions. He was wondering if I could ask you that he could add to his podcast. Okay, I'll do that a little later.
Okay.
Questions up here. And it's the kind of music education, right? Because that's the organization. But all right, so we got next question kind of leads into that from what I just said. Is you learn these instruments and you were jamming, you could play, and then eventually you said, okay, this is you were told that you can make money doing that. It was obvious that you're good enough.
Lie. That's all lies. But
so you decided, hey, I'm gonna study music. So can you tell me what led you through your music study and into teaching
Well, yeah, that's a pretty long and winding road, actually, to coin a Beatlesque phrase. So when I was in high school, I started in high school as a saxophone player and ended up as kind of like a dual, like tuba and sax player. And while I was in high school, I met 3 people that completely changed my life in that time period. I guess kind of 4 in a way too, because none of it would have happened without my band director that I had at the time, a guy named Dave Stevens, who was band director for my sophomore through senior years. And when he started, he was really young. I don't even think he graduated yet, actually, from college. So he was like early 20s. And, you're very idealistic when you start out in your early 20s. You're like, I'm going to bring in all these cool musicians and I'm going to show these kids that you can blah, 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 whatever. So he would bring in people all the time to do things. I remember we had a sectional with the trombones and tuba players in our band, which it makes it sound like it's a lot, but there was like 6 of us in my band because it was tiny. And he brought this guy named Norm Lydell in to do a sectional with us and to help us with playing parts and, getting a good sound and all that sort of stuff. And he introduced himself and he said, I'm a teacher and a professional tuba player. And that concept never occurred to me. Like, wait a minute, you can be like a professional tuba player? What? It just seemed like, I knew there were people that did it, but it's kind of like that rock star thing of like, oh, these are people that came from the planet Mars and you can never be that person. And here's another dude who lives in, upstate New York or actually Southern New York, that was doing this thing and, making a living as a music teacher and tuba player. And that kind of made me go, wow, dude, what? And then a couple of years later, my high school, this is kind of a rambling story, but it all goes places, trust me. My high school that I went to was a very like superpower athletic kind of school. And we had this basketball tournament every year called the McDonald's Classic in Erie. And they would get teams from all over the country, like all these top ranked teams to come in and play. Like I saw Kobe Bryant when he was in high school, play at this thing, and like, he was already like in USA Today and all that sort of junk. Like, he was a thing. And, they would have this big basketball tournament. So we would have a jazz band, like a big band, play at this basketball tournament. And because my school was tiny and the number of students that could handle playing in a big band was even smaller, my band director would hire in all these people to play all the other parts. Like usually the rhythm section was all hired, like most of the brass section, and pretty much everybody was hired except maybe 4 of us that were band students. So the first year that I played it with him, he hired this guy named John Cross, who's another Southern New York dude, who played lead alto saxophone. And we were doing these songs and he's playing and he's just like, he's improvising. He's throwing all this stuff in, he's playing solos. And it was like the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And I'm like poking him on the shoulder in the middle, like while the game's going on, I'm like, hey man, how do you do that? And he was like, oh, it's improvisation. You take chord tones and like, how do you explain improvisation in 30 seconds during a basketball game? But he kind of like laid it out a little bit for me. And I remember he had a wireless mic. And at one point, like he went out, like it was after the game was over, we're still playing. And he's like, he wanders out onto the basketball court and he's soloing and he's walking around. And I'm like, this is the coolest dude I've ever seen in my entire life, right? So that blew my mind. That whole idea of like, I can improvise and I can learn how to do that. And that's really cool. But then like the sort of pièce de résistance of the whole thing was the second year that I played in the McDonald's Classic Band. My band director was able to hire this guy named Bruce Johnstone to play baritone saxophone. And Bruce played in the Maynard Ferguson Big Band. He played with Woody Herman. He played in this group called New York Mary with one of the Brecker brothers. I mean, like he's a serious dude. And I actually had records with him on it.
Right, yeah.
And I was playing baritone sax at the time in the jazz band. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to get to sit next to Bruce Johnstone and play with Bruce Johnstone. Holy shit, like this is amazing. Can I swear? I'm sorry if I...
Yeah, you can, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
But it was totally mind-blowing, right? And so Bruce shows up first night of the tournament, sits down, and I'm scared because I'm like, oh my God, it's Bruce Johnstone, man. Like, what am I going to say? What do I do? I'm totally starstruck. And he leans over and he goes, hey, what kind of reed you playing on? He's from New Zealand and he's also like got kind of a Buffalo accent. So he's got this kind of weird accent. He's like, hey, yeah, what kind of reed you playing at? And I was like, I don't know. Is it a reed? What's a reed? Like I'm freaking out. I'm like, I think I spit out finally that I'm playing on like a 2.5 or something like that. And he reaches in his bag and he hands me one of his reeds. And he's like, here, this is a Rico Royal 4. They kick ass. And I was like, oh my God, he gave me a reed. And I'm freaking out. I put the reed on. I can't play it, of course, because it's like basically like taking a chunk of a tree and sticking it on the mouthpiece, But we started talking and hanging out during the game, and he turned out he was teaching lessons in town, even though he lived in Ripley. I don't know what it is with Southern New York, but there's just a bunch of people there. He was teaching lessons at a music store, and he's like, hey, why don't you come take lessons with me? And I was like, oh yeah, let's do that. So for the next 2 years, I took like weekly lessons with Bruce and got to play next to him and talk about music and talk about being a musician and life. And it's like he was kind of like my Mr. Miyagi in a way.
We just watched those movies with my son.
Yep.
Totally in Mr. Miyagi mode right now, yeah.
So total Mr. Miyagi moment now with him. It was pretty great. And that changed my life. Those 3 things just kind of set me in this direction.
Yeah.
And even then, I still resisted becoming a music major. When I started college, I was actually a pharmacy major. Because I figured I'll make money and they'll play on the side, right?
Yeah.
And I started out as a pre-pharmacy major and I was a music minor. So I was still like in music and practicing and taking lessons and all that stuff. And then, I was going through my classes. They did okay. But I remember I was sitting in biology class and I'm like not even really paying attention to what's happening in biology class. I'm thinking about what I want to practice when I get out of biology class and what I was going to do for my lesson that week. And it's like, it was all music.
Yep.
And I'm like, I think I'm in the wrong major. And I literally stood up in the middle of biology class, walked out, went to the registrar's office and changed majors.
Good. You knew. Yeah.
So yeah. And then once that happened, I kind of dove in. Being again a kind of a small school, I had a lot of opportunities to do a lot of stuff. Like I played in wind ensemble, like the band, concert band, and then I also played in the orchestra. I played in percussion ensemble because they didn't have enough percussionists to fill percussion ensemble. So like the first concert I played on, the first piece that I played on was Ionization by Varese.
Okay.
So it's like, this is crazy. It's awesome. I love it. And we had chamber groups and all that sort of stuff. So it's like I was just playing all the time, became a composition minor. And somewhere along the line, I never really intended to be a teacher, actually. Like, I wanted to play. That was my whole intent when I went in music. And a very influential person in my life, Lowell Hepler, who was my tuba teacher at Mercyhurst, where I went for my undergrad, it's kind of like gently kind of suggested, like, well, you can play. Just, you got a teaching degree, you got something you can do. And he's like, I remember him just saying to me, like, if you can play, you can play. It doesn't matter what degree you have. If you're good, people are going to ask you to play. But if you have a teaching degree, you can also teach, which you can't do if you have a performance degree. Like, you have to have the degree to do that. So why don't you get get the education degree just to have it, and then if you play, you play. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, and then it kind of made sense to me. So I did it.
This looks familiar, vaguely familiar, almost unreal yet. It's too soon to feel yet, close to my soul, and yet so far away. I'm going to go back there someday. Sunrises, night falls, sometimes the sky calls. Is that a song then? Do I belong there? I've never been there, but I know the way. Going to go back there someday. Come and go with me. It's more fun to share. We'll both be completely at home in midair. We're flying, not walking, on featherless wings. We can hold on to love like invisible strings. There's not a word yet for old friends who've just met. Part heaven, part space. Have I found my place? You can just visit, but I plan to stay. I'm going to go back there someday. I'm going to go back there someday. That's a nice one.